A brief introduction to process theology. The statistician George E.P. Box famously said, "All models are wrong, but some are useful." This axiom applies to theology as well as to statistics, particularly in light of how our theological models directly affect how we perceive God and one another, and thus how we live our lives. Process theology is a set of models which have their basis, it could be argued, upon a theory of time, which may or may not be ultimately correct, but is at least true in regards to how we experience time. The nature of time, or rather the nature of God's relation to time, is at the heart of process theology. Classical Christian theology, which is rooted in the thinking of Plato and Aristotle, posits that God is outside of time, existing in an eternal nowness. Thus, God sees all of time, past, present, and future, at once, like a scroll laid out on a desk. The implication of this classical view is that God is not affected, not surprised or disappointed or pleased by events as they occur, or by choices we make, or by actions we undertake. God already knew they would happen. Another implication is that our future is already determined, which in turn implies, as Calvin and Luther sussed out, that our free will is an illusion. Process theology, on the other hand, posits that the only time that actually exists is the present. We travel forward in time as part of an unfolding, expanding universe. Each moment of the past only existed when it was the present. Now it is gone. Just memories and effects and traces remain, like the vapor trail of a jet. The future does not yet exist. It is only possibilities and probabilities. At each moment, the materials of the past, patterns and processes and choices, creates the present. And the patterns and processes and choices occurring right now, in turn, define the future. In the process theology model, God is eternal in terms of having always existed, and omnipresent in terms of being everywhere spatially at once, and omniscient in terms of knowing all there is to know. But God does not know the future, since the future does not yet exist. However, since God knows all that does exist and possibilities exist, then God knows all possible futures. Robert Mesley, in his basic introduction to process theology, uses the analogy of a phonograph record to illustrate the classical deterministic view of time, and the analogy of an improvisational jazz combo to illustrate the process view. In process theology, writes Mesley, time is not like the grooves stamped onto a record. Instead, time becomes, like music improvised by a jazz combo. The musicians have some idea where they're going, and the choices they have made so far suggest directions for the future, but the whole point of improvisation is that they are making up the music as they go. They can change keys, change tempo, suddenly shoot off in response to a new idea. After playing 7 notes of a scale, they may choose not to play that 8th note, but leave a silence and start off in some totally new direction. Following the image of the world as a jazz combo, we might play with the idea of God as the lead flute player. God has power to shape the music by God's own choices of what notes to sound. To the extent that the other players are sensitive and choose to follow God's lead, the revelation of God's musical vision has power to shape the becoming of time. But the insensitivity of the world and the world's choice to create its own music means that the music is not always what God would choose. Process theologian Catherine Keller echoes this idea in her book On the Mystery, when she writes, "We are called to improvise. We are invited to risk the adventure. for our adventure is inseparable from the divine creativity. The unfolding world is not a pre-programmed drama. Or, as the Buddha said, do not dwell in the past, do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment. Since the nature of time is such a central aspect of theology, classical or process, it would be interesting to consider what the science of physics has to say about time. It turns out, however, that physicists don't really know what time is. Time is certainly related to motion in space, but there's more to it than that. For instance, what role does gravity play in the nature of time? Is time, as Einstein postulated, a fourth dimension? And if so, why can we change direction in the other three dimensions, but not in time? This gets real deep real fast. To keep it in the most general of terms, there are basically two views among physicists about the nature of time. They are block time, also called static time, and presentism, also called flowing time. Block time posits that all time, past, present, and future, exists simultaneously. Albert Einstein, who was a proponent of the block universe theory, said, "People like us who believe in physics know that the distinction between the past, the present, and the future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion." Many, but not all, physicists interpret Einstein's theory of general relativity as pointing towards block time. But there are a number of problems with block time. For example, if every instant of the past and future currently exists, it implies an infinite number of universes. Imagine a stack of photographs which were taken one after the other, but each photograph encompasses the entire universe in all dimensions, past and future. Or if every instant of the past and future currently exists, what is the mechanism that causes us to move forward through time? If every instant of the past and future currently exists, why haven't time travelers from thousands or millions of years in our future come to visit us? Surely they would figure out how, eventually. Block time also creates some interesting paradoxes, which have provided fodder for many a science fiction story, such as, if a person in the future travels backwards in time and kills their ancestor, that would mean that the person in the future would never come into existence, which means that they would not exist to travel backward in time to kill their ancestor, which means that their ancestor would not be killed, which means the person in the future would come into existence, and on it goes in an infinite loop. One more interesting aspect of block time is how well it actually matches up with the classical or Greek theological view of God existing outside of time and knowing past, present, and future simultaneously. In block time, as in classical theology, there is no free will. Your choices and their consequences already exist. Now, flowing time, or presentism, posits that time is a property of the expansion of space as a result of the Big Bang. Differences in the speed of the flow of time, per general relativity, are caused by differences in the rate of expansion of the universe and by the curvature of space. Think of the universe as an explosion which began at the Big Bang and is continuing to expand outward. This expansion is occurring not just spatially, but also chronologically. Thus, time has forward motion, and the present is the edge of that chronological expansion. Imagine if you exploded a stick of dynamite. There would be rapid outward expansion, but the explosion would not continue to exist in perpetuity in each and every phase of its expansion, as block time would postulate. So it is with the idea of flowing time. The past no longer exists. The future does not yet exist. Only the present exists in actuality. This means that time travel is impossible, and that time paradoxes, such as traveling backwards in time and killing your ancestor, cannot occur. It also means that we have a modicum of free will within the limitations of environment and habit and knowledge of options available to us and the past choices which have shaped the present moment, and that our choices in the present actually contribute to creating the future.